Welcome to Challenging Silence, a podcast from Women's Health and Women's Hands Community Health Center.
On this show, we are having much needed discussions about topics related to female genital mutilation or cutting with survivors, advocates, and community members. We're your hosts, Tomilola
and Nanti. Challenging Silence is brought to you by the Flourish Project, made possible through funding from Women and Gender Equality Canada.
You can listen to this podcast series on all major podcast listening platforms and our website, flourishaccess.ca.
Please note that this podcast covers topics of a sensitive nature, including domestic abuse and violence. To ensure privacy and safety, some guests have chosen to remain anonymous.
This podcast is age appropriate for 16 plus.
As we all know, gender-based violence is deeply rooted in gender inequality and the power dynamics between men and women, plus the socio-cultural views, create an environment that pushes and accepts men having control over women. The fight to end violence against women and for gender equality cannot be achieved without involving the men and boys in the work.
Today, we are having this discussion with Timiro and Roble from Midaynta Community Services. Midaynta is committed to building vibrant, socially integrated, and united communities, and they do so by providing settlement services and other programs that advances education, as well as support services for refugees, immigrants, and youths in need in Toronto. Welcome to the both of you, and please introduce yourselves to our listeners.
Thank you very much for having us. My name is Timiro Agane. I am a youth justice coordinator here at Midaynta Community Services, but I do also support my colleague Roble as a GBV intake worker as well. I also do support the Mothers Initiative at Midaynta Community Services with the Mending the Crack in the Sky Mothers.
Welcome.
Yeah, my name is Roble Issa. I am the gender-based violence caseworker here at Midaynta. And yeah, I work closely with Timiro as well on all the different programs that we have, but my focus is on gender-based violence. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And can you tell us a little bit more about Midaynta as an organization and the gender-based violence program that you currently coordinate?
Yeah, absolutely. So Midaynta is a charitable organization. We started back in the mid-90s. We started off as the settlement services, and then from there we just kept expanding, adding more and more programs. We have a youth outreach program. We have student family advocate. We have the seniors program. We have youth justice, which Timiro runs, and we have the GBV program, which I coordinate. This is a new program we started back, I think it's been about a year and a half now. Essentially what this program is, it's a gender-based violence program that's intervention and prevention as well. It's targeted towards Black male youth ages 12 to 20. And this just came out of a need in our community to kind of like change some of the harmful attitudes that we were seeing. And we were able to get some funding and start this program. So we do a 12-week curriculum. We've conducted virtual and in person as well. There's a group component to it as well as a one-on-one component. And we basically just run these workshops and do case management for the male youth in the northwest of Toronto. Now we're working on some informational videos, working on getting in more schools. And essentially what the program is designed to do is to reduce gender-based violence-related offenses among Black male youth, as well as increase the recognition of the harmful behaviors and attitudes associated with GBV. We've also been connecting with schools, community safety tables. We also sit on a domestic violence advisory committee. We attend focus tables every week, cluster tables, and yeah, just trying to get to these youth early so we can kind of change those attitudes, like I said.
Yeah, you guys are definitely doing good work in the community and targeting root causes of violence in the Black and African communities.
Thank you so much for sharing about your program, Roble. You spoke on some harmful attitudes that you noticed within the communities and how this influenced your programming. How significant is the role men and boys play in ending gender-based violence?
I think it's very important, honestly. Just from doing these workshops in the schools, like I've been doing them in middle schools with grade 7s and 8s, and just kind of like some of the harmful attitudes that you hear from them was honestly pretty alarming at first. It was like when you talk to these youth, they almost felt like if I'm not physically like striking a woman, like how could it be gender-based violence? You know, not understanding that GBV comes in many different forms. They didn't understand things like power dynamics, consent, psychological violence, all that kind of stuff. So I think with a lot of these programs, what you see is they're usually like interventions. So they'll wait until a person has committed the offense and then come in and address it. But what we realized is we wanted to start it early before it even got to that point, so we can try and prevent that. That's why we started so early. And that's why we also decided to target it towards boys, because usually they're targeted towards women who have been victims of gender-based violence to come forward and kind of get the different supports that they need. But if we're only addressing the women and we're not addressing the males, who are oftentimes the ones who are being charged with these offenses, then it's going to be hard to kind of end gender-based violence or address these attitudes. So that was kind of what it was born out of. And we did different like research studies and focus groups to kind of determine exactly what the community needed, and that's how we were able to design our curriculum and design our program. Yeah, that's how our program was built.
Awesome. And you also touch on you touched on the socialization of men and boys and how, you know, they're taught to be hard and tough and these expectations of how they're supposed to behave. And this is a root cause of gender-based violence. And I love the fact that you say you want to look at the youth starting from a very young age to address these issues, because, you know, these patriarchal attitudes that view men as being dominant over women and all of that also perpetuate what we're talking about today. And with toxic masculinity, these attitudes and behaviors, you know, culturally associated with or expected of men, emphasize strength and domination to assert power. And that's something that your program is addressing, which is absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and what I would contribute to that is I think representation is quite important. And this is why we have our programs specifically that designed for men, because we find that men are the ones who are deemed the perpetrators, who are deemed the aggressors. So that's why we thought as a community it was imperative that we design a program that targets men and boys from a young age to at least have a healthy understanding of what a healthy masculinity does look like. What does that encompass? So that's why this program is very specific, because again, I believe that it starts from a young age in terms of, you know, that awareness, in terms of that education piece. And that's why our program is specific to boys, because we do understand that, you know, most other agencies and non-for-profits usually are targeted towards girls. And if everything is always going to be targeted toward girls and, you know, women, where do men fit into that, into the solution piece of that? So that's why we thought it was important that we had a program in curriculum that was gender specific in terms of men.
Yeah, for sure. You touched on representation, and it is important, especially when men who look like the youth are leading them towards a positive change and prevention of toxic behavior as they're growing up. Toxic masculinity has been recognized as a contributing factor to the perpetration of gender-based violence. How have you observed toxic masculinity contributing to gender-based violence, specifically in the Black and African Canadian communities?
Excellent question. And I think it kind of segues to the question we had earlier. Toxic masculinity does exist in many cultures and communities. And this is because of the ideologies that emphasize these negative stereotypes. And some of those stereotypes are like men don't cry, men are not supposed to be sensitive, you know, macho men don't have mental health challenges. Because of these perceptions that reinforce these stereotypes, that's what leads a lot of these, you know, young people to have those toxic masculinity traits. And patriarchy is another one as well, right? It also has led many men to believe that the power dynamics is, you know, is integral and it's something that it's innate in them. And that's not right. That needs to be dismantled and that needs to be addressed. Patriarchal stereotypes force men to act tough, and any signs of vulnerabilities are stigmatized. So I think that's why, you know, if we dismantle patriarchy and we let boys know that it's okay and there's room for them to be sensitive and for them to come forward and, maybe re-examine what a healthy masculinity looks like. I think that helps lead to finding solutions long term. An interesting concept, actually, that's coined by Judith Butler is something called performativity. And this is a theory that explains how gender is actually constructed, right? It's socially constructed. And it's usually done through speech, it's usually done through acts. And this concept entails viewing actions and behaviors and gestures as the result of an individual's identity. So again, going back to that, identity piece, if we cultivate what healthy masculinity looks like from a young age, I feel like that would help, dismantle what toxic masculinity has been portrayed by society, especially now with a lot of, young people looking to social media, looking to media in general to, find out what healthy masculinity looks like. They're not really helping, destigmatize those norms, right? If anything, they're only adding to the hurts and the misinformation about what a healthy man should act or look like.
Yeah, like stigma is really a big factor. Like stereotypes, negative cultural social norms, they need to be abandoned, and youth should be told there is room for sensitivity. You don't always have to have a hard shell, which is what leads to the perpetration of violence.
Yeah, and so what steps are necessary to abandon this negative behavioral response and move towards healthy, positive masculinity? And how can we guide the younger generation, boys and youths, towards healthy masculinity?
Well, to be honest with you, I think this question is very, very important. And I believe that it starts from adolescence. It starts from, targeting the youth, because the youth are the men of the future, right? So if we can target youth and paint a constructive and a healthy consciousness of what healthy masculinity looks like, I think that would be a very good starting point. In addition to that, I also think that creating platforms and safe spaces for men to express their insecurities and normalize men to speak out when they do have challenges is also important to contributing to healthy masculinity, because most unhealthy toxic masculinity is actually cultivated amongst other men when they congregate, at the gym or they congregate at the barbershop. That's usually when these stereotypes are being perpetuated. But I think that it's men who can become an ally for other men and call out, sexist or toxic behavior and say, hey, that's not right, and kind of holding each other accountable. I think that's a very good starting point as well. And it helps men break those barriers, right? And reconstruct what a healthy masculinity should look like in society.
Thank you so much for that, Temiro. Anything to add, Roble?
Yeah, just to add to that, a lot of the things that these boys know about masculinity is it just comes from like being around their friends or like whatever they see on TV. So they don't really know what that means to have like healthy masculinity. So that's actually one of the topics in the 12-week curriculum is like healthy and unhealthy masculinity and kind of like what that looks like. I found like when I do those workshops and they're around other boys, you kind of see that unhealthy masculinity where they're trying to like impress each other and like trying not to seem soft. So they have kind of all these harmful attitudes towards it. We're just trying to change that attitude because they just don't know better, like a lot of these youth at this age, because that's just all they've ever been taught. So we're just really trying to reprogram and just change that thinking with this curriculum.
Yeah. And one thing that is important, especially working with Black and African communities, is culture, because culture plays a huge role in our everyday life actions, behaviors. And I know Midaynta's GBV program is built within a cultural context. So how effective is culturally relevant prevention and intervention programming in making a difference among the youth and young adults in our communities, and also better engaging them to speak up and act against violence and saying that this is wrong, we need to end this? How important is that cultural context?
Yeah, I think the cultural context is very important, and it was something that we definitely put a lot of emphasis on when we were constructing the curriculum. Like for us, we're kind of a unique organization because we serve Black people, we serve Muslim people. There's a lot of like intersections that we have to consider with our different programs. So that's why like with the curriculum we have a week on like generational trauma, we have gender stereotypes, we have mental health and well-being, because if you're just addressing the GBV, you're kind of ignoring a lot of other parts of their identity. Oftentimes, the GBV is also a symptom of other things going on in their life. So that's why we have the group component where we can all kind of do it together, but we also have one-on-one case management as well. So we can kind of address their individual needs as well, get them that one-on-one treatment and have them kind of like open up and tailor it to whatever their needs are. Another thing you see is, since we do serve a bigger Muslim clientele, a lot of times just starting the dialogue about GBV is kind of an issue that we notice at first. A lot of these topics are pretty taboo in our community. So first step is always starting that dialogue, because you can't really address these needs until we start talking about it. So that's one thing that we're definitely focusing on, like how to address it from a Black lens, a Muslim lens, like whatever it needs. That's one good thing about the curriculum, is it's able to basically be molded to whatever the needs of the individuals are. So yeah, that's one thing that we definitely keep in mind, is that cultural lens.
It's good that generational trauma is a topic in your workshops, because when children and youth see trauma and violence at home, they tend to replicate that behavior because that's what they know. Mara, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. Thank you, Roble, for that. And thank you for your comments as well. I think having a culturally appropriate program is quite vital, especially some of the, demographic that we do serve are newcomers. So just that transition from, coming from back home into within Canadian culture and making sure that they are assimilating. When, gender-based violence becomes a problematic issue within the home, we do have to provide a lot of that advocacy piece and that education piece, explaining what gender-based violence is, what it looks like. And I know sometimes, having those conversations like Roble mentioned is quite difficult, because a lot of it is stigmatized, and a lot of them goes under radar, in the sense that they don't even see it as gender-based violence. It's normalized. So breaking down those stereotypes and breaking down those concepts within a culturally appropriate lens is quite important. And then sometimes, it brings out a lot of sensitivity when we're dealing with, especially when it comes to newcomers as well, because it opens a lot of trauma, it opens a lot of wounds. So it gets challenging, but I think that's why it's important that the people who are doing the work are reflective of the demographic they're serving, because again, we're able to provide that unique contribution in terms of, if we need to explain something in a different language that they understand, we're able to do that. We're able to maybe perhaps paint a picture and do it more from a graphic point of view. We're able to do that. So again, like Roble said, we tailor the program to suit the needs of the client we're serving. And that's why it's important that, gender-based violence is being led by agencies who do provide those cultural competencies when they're actually conducting the programming.
Yeah, culture is really very important in the engagement, especially with newcomers. We need to make sure that we are reaching them in the way that they understand, in the language that they understand. Reaching and teaching boys, it must start very early on in their lives. They need to be engaged with good male role models within their family as well as in the community. But having these discussions about gender equality and preventing gender-based violence is really crucial and needs to happen more. And also, as Tamara said earlier, social media. Social media is such a good vessel to reach youth, young adults. That's a good way of reaching them, making sure that we are telling them gender-based violence is wrong, healthy masculinity is the way to go, and this is how we can reach that point.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roble and Tamira, for joining us on this episode and coming in and sharing your experiences with the work that you do and what needs to be done moving forward. Thank you for joining this episode.
Thank you very much for having us, and thank you for doing amazing work. And I hope this conversation continues. Just like Tomila said, this is a work that's affecting all levels of society and families. And at the end of the day, I think, education is the best course of action to help dismantle gender-based violence.
Yeah, perfectly said. Thank you guys so much for having us. This was a great discussion.
Thank you to both of you for joining us.
As Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, if you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say you're neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. We all have a responsibility to our communities. It's not just the role of the women to advocate for other women, but men and boys have a duty too. Let's find our tribes and do the necessary work. Join us on next week's episode as we will be talking about protecting and safeguarding girls in Canada that are at risk of FGMC.